I'm John McQuay with 8541 Tactical, and this is Mail Call Mondays, the show that answers your questions about precision rifles, optics, and equipment. Well, welcome to another Monday, and this thing sitting in front of me is what a Mega Arms MATEN looks like before it's assembled. We actually have all the parts laying out here in the shop, getting ready to do the first run of the Mega Arms MATEN 6.5 Creedmoor build. So that is why we have this pile of stuff right here. Now, I asked you guys to send in some semi-automatic questions since we are getting ready to get started on this. So we've got a couple of those, and we've got them mixed in with some of our regular questions as well. So let's go ahead and get started. And our first question comes from Derek. And Derek asks, any thoughts about the 300 Win Mag possibly? That would interest me a lot. I don't hear too much about guys using 300 Win Mag in the long range world. Well, Derek, there are a couple of reasons why you don't see a lot of 300 Win Mags, especially at PRS type competitions. First of all is the recoil penalty that you pay to launch that 30 caliber bullet at high speeds. The second one is the barrel life. Generally, you're getting considerably shorter barrel life. And when you combine those two, there are a whole lot better options out there. For instance, the 260 and the 6.5 Creedmoor pretty much duplicate the trajectory of the 300 Win Mag, but they give you a whole lot lighter recoiling platform, a lighter platform in general, and they give you a little bit better barrel life. So that's one of the reasons why you don't see the 300 Win Mag for competition type shooting. Now, if you're going out and you're just trying to ding some steel at long range, 300 Win Mag is perfectly adequate. But if you actually get into taking it to some classes and doing some training where you're going to be putting a lot of rounds down range in a very short amount of time, then the 300 Win Mag can really make you pay for it. Then there, of course, is the added expense of pumping more powder into each one of those cartridges to get the velocity that you need to get those bullets down range. So while it's a great hunting rifle, fairly decent at long range, and I know guys will throw in that the military still uses them, 300 Win Mag is still in use in some special military sniping roles. It just really is been eclipsed by several other calibers. And I've actually looked at building up the 300 Win Mag for doing some competition shooting like up at Thunder Valley in Ohio. If I choose to build up a 300 Win Mag, it will be a niche platform. It'll be something that I use occasionally, but not something that I take out and make my main long range rifle. Our next question comes from Moondog. What are some options for Accurizing a currently owned AR-15? What are some key considerations, best bang for your buck, in building an Accurized AR of any caliber? Well, Moondog, the key to an accurate AR is barrel and bolt. That's pretty much where all your accuracy is at. So if you already have an AR-15 and it's shooting okay, but you want to really take it to that next level, then you need to look at stepping up to a much higher quality barrel and bolt. And what you really want to do is you want to order the barrel and the bolt from the same place. When we started ordering components here for our Mega Arms MATEN, we purchased both the barrel and the bolt from the same spot so that they could be matched up and they could make sure the headspace was good on before they sent out. Now, if you are actually having a barrel made up for the most accuracy you can drag out of an AR-15, then you're not just going to want that barrel and bolt matched up after the fact. You will want that barrel chambered for that specific bolt. So that way the headspace is absolutely dead on for the bolt that you're going to use with that barrel. And there are a couple of different companies out there that are able to do that. If I right now was going to order a barrel for an AR-15 to absolutely take it to that top notch, then I would probably look at companies like White Oak Armament or Krieger Barrels. Krieger will actually build you an AR-15 barrel specifically for a bolt and supply you the bolt at the same time. So look into things like that. Now, once you've got your barrel and bolt, you need to make sure that that barrel fits well into the upper receiver. You can't have a lot of slop in there. If there is a lot of slop in your receiver, you're either going to want to look at either getting a different upper receiver or you're going to want to look at doing a glue-in installation where you actually glue that barrel into the upper receiver. And if you're using a regular upper receiver, not a monolithic type deal, then that's not a big deal, because when it comes time to replace the barrel, you can just throw the receiver out with the barrel, buy a new receiver, and start afresh. Once you've got the barrel and the receiver knocked down, you'll want a hand guard that free floats the barrel, and there are a gajillion of them out there, but as long as the barrel is free floated, it's going to be able to do whatever it needs to do. And then lastly, you want the gas system. You're going to want a gas block that doesn't put undue stress on the barrel, but you're going to want to also be able to tune the gas coming out of that barrel to just do what you need to do to operate the action. So those are a couple of little pointers for an AR that you currently have that you want to rebuild into a real tack driver. Our next question comes from Dave. Dave asks, is there a better, cheap, and reliable caliber to kill paper at 800 yards and slightly beyond besides a .308 for those of us that shoot factory ammo? Well, Dave, if you're shooting factory ammo, if you're limited to factory ammo and you don't want to go with the .308, then really the .223 is going to be your next best choice. Now, .223 at 800 yards, you're going to pay a penalty there. The wind is really going to start blowing those rounds around, and you're going to narrow down your factory ammo selection because you're going to want to run 75 and 77 grain bullets. So if you're really trying to save money versus the .308, then that's the direction to go. Now, if you're not worried about saving money and you want a better option than the .308, then you could look towards something like the 6.5 Creedmoor or the 260, or even some of the 6mm cartridges. You will need to look at companies like Copper Creek Ammunition, who will load a variety of different loads, and you can still buy them. You don't have to reload them, but you're not going to get into ammunition from Federal or some of the bigger manufacturers in those smaller calibers. 6.5 Creedmoor, of course, is supported by Hornady, so you can buy 6.5 Creedmoor and you can buy Hornady ammunition to fuel that thing, but it's not going to be cheaper than a .308. So really, to play the game, you got to pay, but if you just want something that's cheaper and will still poke holes at 800, then you can do so with a .223 launching high BC bullets. But really, I would suggest you get into reloading. I would suggest you get into 6mm or 6.5mm cartridges, and then you're going to be cheaper than factory .308, and you're going to be much more effective. Nick asks, do you full size your semi-auto rifle brass, or do you have a system to squeeze a little more accuracy just by moving the neck back just a touch so it's a little more customized to your rifle? Well, Nick, it really all depends upon what I need to do. Generally, for my semi-automatic rifle ammo, I will do what's called bumping the shoulder back, and I'll bump it back 2 to 3 thousandths, and that will give me reliable chambering. It won't give me a lot of resistance when you go to chamber that cartridge. It's generally not a good idea just to neck size semi-automatic ammunition, because once you get a couple of firings down, then you will start to get the body of the cartridge swell out, and you'll start to get that shoulder pushed forward enough that it takes a little bit more effort to chamber those cartridges. That little more effort turns into a little bit more resistance and can keep the bolt carrier from going into battery and prevent you from firing those cartridges, and it also makes it very difficult to get those cartridges back out. So as a general rule for semi-automatic reloads, I will bump the shoulder back, and you simply do that by turning out your full-length sizing die. You need to have some way of measuring the fired brass that comes out of that rifle, and then you're going to screw your full-length sizing die in until it pushes that shoulder back just about 2 thousandths, and then stop there and make sure it chambers reliably in your rifle. So that is my recommendation for sizing for semi-automatic rifles. Freddie asks, got one for you, sir. With or without a muzzle brake, is there really a difference in accuracy? Keep MCM coming. Well, Freddie, we'll do these as long as you guys will watch them. As far as an accuracy difference with and without a muzzle brake, if you have a properly threaded barrel, and the threading's concentric to the bore, and you have a properly made muzzle brake that has enough clearance in it that you're not going to contact the bullet and is not impinging upon the bore, and then you install that muzzle brake properly without too much force onto that barrel, you should have no degradation in accuracy. You may see a slight increase in accuracy because that brake will change the harmonics slightly, and you may also have to rework up your loads if you're doing hand loads that are right on the verge of an accuracy node, because you are adding something to the barrel that's going to change the way it vibrates. Where the real accuracy of a muzzle brake will come in is the accuracy that you are able to support with that rifle system, because lower recoil is going to reduce your tendency to flinch. It is going to make it easier to hold the rifle on target and to spot impacts downrange. Now, the flip side of that coin is now you're going to have to deal with that muzzle blast coming out to the side and reflecting off of barriers. Shooting it underneath a tin roof, shooting it in between concrete shooting benches makes it really more difficult with a muzzle brake. You'll stay on target a whole lot better, but it'll feel like somebody's kicking you in the side of the head. And I really suggest if you shoot rifles with muzzle brakes a lot, double up on your ear protection. Put earplugs in and then put electronic earmuffs on over top of those. That way you can turn up the volume on the electronic earmuffs to hear ambient sounds. But the plugs and the muffs together will work better to knock down the concussion of that rifle when you fire. Next question comes from Josh, and Josh asks, which is better for a precision semi-auto rifle, gas impingement or piston? Well, Josh, my preference is for direct impingement. It's not to say a piston gun can't be very accurate, it's just that a direct impingement rifle I really think has a whole lot less to go wrong. You just have a simple gas tube, and there's less to troubleshoot if you start having an accuracy problem. There's less to contribute to or degrade the harmonics of the rifle. So my preference is for direct impingement rifles. Arsenio asks, Remington 700 action versus Savage action, pros and cons. Well, there's really been an ongoing battle for a long time, Savage shooters versus Remington shooters, and I don't understand it. There are two different types of systems. They appeal to two different types of shooters. The Savage it has a definite following where guys want to be able to tinker with stuff at home. The thing with the Savage is with that barrel nut and with the floating bolt design, it makes it very easy to change the calibers on the gun. It makes it very easy to change out the barrels at home. You just simply need a headspace gauge. You need to buy your new barrel, screw your new barrel in until a headspace is correctly, lock down the nut, and you're good to go. So if you have a caliber that likes to burn up barrels like a 243 or some of the other 6mm out there, then a Savage definitely offers a great advantage. The floating bolt head along with the barrel offers a very accurate design because the bolt head can center itself up and you don't get any twisting or any misalignment there. So it is a really good design. There are a couple of things that I personally dislike about the Savages. I don't like the feel of the bolt on the Savages because you do have that bolt head that is a separate piece from the bolt body, and so it gives you a little bit looser feel on the bolt. Also, I don't really like Savage's the trigger that they use on it. The trigger with that little funky lever in the middle of it, it's kind of distracting. I have a couple that have those triggers on them. I have a couple of Savages here that are like that, and it just really is not it's not my preference. Again, they can be very accurate, they can work very well, but it's not my preference. Now on the Remington, the benefits on the Remington is you have a tried and true action. There are really fewer components. The bolt is a one-piece bolt body and bolt head is all one part. Now of course the lever is a separate part that is brazed on, and that is a failure point and has failed in the past for some shooters. But that design overall, once it breaks in, has a very smooth, very linear feel to it, and I really like the way that bolt operates. The disadvantage to it is that the barrel really has to be installed by a gunsmith. Now, there have been some companies out there that have offered a hybrid Remington / Savage type design where you can take a Remington receiver and you can screw a barrel into the Remington receiver until it head spaces and then use a nut to lock it down against the recoil lug and against the receiver. And that will give you the added advantage of being able to swap barrels at home. Now, we haven't got any hands-on with some of the systems, but all reports I've received are that they work very good. Now, of course, Remington has also had some issues in the past with their trigger systems, notably the most recent recall on the X-Mark triggers, but the triggers are very simple to replace with just 2 pins to pop out, and there are a ton of options on triggers for the Remingtons out there. So really, my preference is for the Remingtons. I've shot Savages. I'm not against Savages. At some point in time, I really want to do a budget build type system on a Savage 10 rifle, since we've already done one on the Remington 700, and show you guys what are a little bit different on those type of rifles. I've seen both of them compete in national level competitions. Savage has really kicked butt on the bench rest side of things on FTR. So really it's just whichever one you prefer more, whichever one you like the feel of better, and whichever direction you want to go. Sean asks, what are your deciding factors to go with the 6.5 Creedmoor build instead of the 260 Remington? Well, Sean, that's a very, very good question, and what it really comes down to is what the cartridges were specifically designed to do. Now, the 6.5 Creedmoor was designed from the ground up as a competition cartridge and with semi-automatic rifles in mind. The problem that you run into, and I will grab one of, this is a 260 dummy cartridge right here. The problem that you run into is where the neck and the shoulder is on this 260 cartridge. For long range shooting, we need to use high BC bullets, and a high BC bullet usually is going to end up being a longer bullet. When you get these longer bullets, you have one of two choices. Either you have to seat them long and they will no longer fit in a magazine, or you have to push the bullet back into the case, and that takes up case capacity, it takes up room for powder, and it increases the pressures inside the case. One other problem that you'll run into is you can actually get to the point where you're trying to push so much of the bullet back into the case that the neck can't actually grip onto the bullet. You're forward of the ogive and you're starting to get the bullet loose in the case, and that's not a good thing either. With these 260s, the way I have them set up for our Remington 700 in the Kinetic Research Group chassis, they will not fit in a PMag, and I don't believe they'll fit in a DPMS magazine either. They're just too long. They will just barely fit in an Accuracy International magazine to go into those chassis systems. Now, the 6.5 Creedmoor, it still gives me just a little bit less capacity than the 260 cases, but the shoulder design and the neck design is made to be able to accommodate those longer bullets and be able to accommodate them in a semi-automatic magazine. So really, overall, the ballistic performance is going to be very, very similar between the 260 and the 6.5. But the operation, how we're going to load them and how we're going to keep the cartridges in the magazine ready to go down range really favors the 6.5 Creedmoor. If you have a 260 and you have a 260 that's set up and working fine, there's generally not a reason to switch over to a 6.5 Creedmoor. However, we already have a 260. They're probably not going to share ammunition because usually a gas gun will like a little bit different load than the bolt guns will, so we're not worried about ammunition interchangeability. And once we have the brass prepped and ready to go, that brass will stay with that rifle. So I'm still able to use the same components, the same powder, the same bullets between 260 and 6.5. I just won't be able to use the same brass, and I'll have to switch the dies over when I change out and go from 260 to 6.5 Creedmoor. So that's a little bit of the reason that we decided to go with the 6.5 for this rifle. And the other reason is I just don't have a 6.5. So this gives us a little bit more experience with the 6.5 Creedmoor round. Christopher asks, will the megalithic receiver take any DPMS spec bolt carrier group? can you use a nickel boron coated bolt carrier group? Well, the Mega Arms megalithic receiver will accept either the DPMS spec or the Armalite spec bolt carrier groups. The only difference between the two is you need to go with the same barrel extension for the bolt and carrier that you use, unless you are really sharp and you have the ability to tinker around with different tolerances. It's generally a good idea to have a barrel that is set up for a DPMS carrier and use the DPMS bolt and carrier, or a barrel that's set up for Armalite and use an Armalite bolt and carrier. In this project, we're actually going to use a DPMS spec carrier, and whether you want to use nickel boron or any of the other coatings out there, that's totally up to you. That usually doesn't have an impact on the actual carrier itself and the headspace itself. So any of the fancy coatings out there, go right ahead. It's just a matter of making sure that everything headspaces and everything actually fits together in the receiver fine, and that's more of an assembly thing. You can get tolerance stacking no matter which system you go with, and you have to pay attention to that when you put the rifle together. But we'll talk a little bit more about that when we actually get to the assembly portion of this build. Our next question comes from Ted, and Ted asks, what's your recommended rifle scope magnification for 300 to 800 yard tactical shooting, not bench or prone target? What's your preference for your matches, and where do you typically set your magnification? Love MCM, thanks. Well, Ted, typically I like to choose a scope that is in the 20 power magnification range. That is just simply so that when you have those prone shots where you need to be extremely precise, you can crank that magnification up as high as the conditions will allow. But when we are shooting off of barricades or we're shooting with those wide target arrays, I usually have my magnification down around 15 to 12 power. And the reason is I just need that wider field of view to be able to transition from target to target efficiently. When you start to crank up that magnification, of course your field of view shrinks down, and then you're limited to what targets you can see. We see a lot of guys at competition waste a lot of time hunting for targets because they've got that magnification up too small, and up too high, and that field of view down too small. So it's really very often better to crank the magnification down and get the large field of view. I would say for a tactical rifle match, if you have an optic that goes up to 15 power, you are not really going to be handicapped. There will be very few shots where any higher magnification would do you good. What I often use the maximum magnification on my scope, like for instance the Night Force Beast, where it goes up to 25 power. What I will most often use that for is spotting beforehand, watching mirage, figuring out what my conditions are downrange. I basically use it as a rifle mounted spotting scope to see the mirage. I can go through the different yard lines and see what the wind is doing at different yard lines, and then I'll crank it back before the shooting actually begins. So in that vein, it keeps me from having to carry a separate piece of gear, although I'll usually still carry a small 8 to 10 power monocular in my bag. But it gives me a little bit added use, and I can still crank it up for those precise paper shots and that kind of stuff. So I hope that gives you a little bit of idea of what works for me. Our next question is from Sean, and Sean asks, do you plan to use an adjustable gas block for this build and your Thunderbeast suppressor on this rifle? Will you have to adjust the gas block when you use the suppressor? Sean, we're not going in this with the intention to use the Thunderbeast on this rifle, especially when we're talking about gas rifles. Adding a suppressor adds a whole nother host of problems that you have to overcome. Throwing the suppressor on there increases the back pressure in the gas system and will operate the operating assembly harder than it would when you're running unsuppressed. We will be running a adjustable gas block. In fact, I've got it right here from SLR Rifle Works. They sent over one of their very nice, very well machined adjustable gas blocks. And that will allow us to tune the rifle to the load. When we go into hand loading for the rifle a little bit later on down the road, that also may allow us to get a little bit more velocity and tune that gas system down so that we're not slamming the bolt carrier group around. Now, if I did use the suppressor on the rifle, then more than likely I would have to tune the gas system down again to dial out some of that gas pressure and get the operating assembly back to running where it was prior to putting the suppressor on. If you have a rifle that you may do that switch back and forth, then what you really need to do is get a gas block that is click adjustable like this one, and that way you can count the clicks that you need to close it down when you put the suppressor on. That way you can go suppressed or unsuppressed pretty quickly, and the Allen keys that you use to adjust these, they'll fit in your pistol grip, so you'll be good to go there. But for an actual competition rifle, which the goal here is to build up a semi-automatic competition rifle, we're going to go with a very effective muzzle brake instead of the suppressor, so it will get us added recoil reduction, help keep us on target a little bit better, and remove any of the issues with the added gas pressure and of course the mirage and all the other things that you get with using a suppressor on a competition rifle. Now, I'm not totally against using suppressors on competition rifles. I do from time to time. When I was down at PTS shooting the Precision Rifle Series match, I watched Rick Reeve absolutely rock with a suppressor on his rifle, and that thing was a big old long rifle when you screwed that suppressor on there. So it works for some guys. My preference is usually just to run with a muzzle brake instead of a suppressor. Steven asks, love to hear more about the 6.5 Creedmoor as it applies to large frame builds. Will there be a 6.5 Creedmoor reloading segment? Well, as I mentioned in the answer to Sean's question, we will do 6.5 Creedmoor reloading a little bit further on down the track. Copper Creek provided us with a good deal of 6.5 Creedmoor ammunition to get this build off and running without any tweaking, and that was kind of one of the advantages of doing a 6.5 Creedmoor build, is there is commercially available match ready ammunition for the rifle. So those of you guys that don't reload, then you can build this rifle, you can get into it with store-bought ammunition and then save your brass, and down the road maybe you can start reloading when you get the time. So we will eventually do a load workup just to see what the absolute razor's edge accuracy we can pull out of the system is, and to show you guys that really it's no different reloading for this rifle than it is for any of our other rifles. But not right away. We'll probably have a month or two go on down the line before we get into 6.5 Creedmoor reloading. And our final question comes from Callie. Callie asks, what is the ideal weather condition for zeroing your bolt action rifle? Remington 700 police model. Well, no matter what kind of rifle it is, the ideal weather condition is the condition that you're going to shoot the most in, and no wind at all. You want to shoot in the condition that you want to zero in the condition that you're going to shoot in the most, because that means your rifle will be at the temperature that it will normally be at. The barrel harmonics will be the same for what it is normally at. In the case of a non-free floated stock, or maybe not a chassis system, maybe an old school wood stock or polymer stock, then that will be providing the same amount of pressure against the barrel that it would in your most used shooting condition. So zeroing your rifle in the condition that you see the most is probably the most beneficial for you. When we say zero wind, that is always the best. Zero early in the morning when you really don't have any wind, or whatever your weather conditions are for your area. Whenever you can get the least amount of wind. If I could take rifles into a 100-yard tunnel and zero in a 100-yard tunnel with absolutely no crosswind, that would be the absolute best condition that I could zero in. But whatever environmental conditions you zero in, it's really important that you take good notes on what those conditions were so you can refer to them back later on. If there was any wind, try to get a really accurate wind reading and make sure you log that in. That way, if you start to stretch out later on, you get 200, 300 yards, and you notice that what wind correction you're having to dial on doesn't add up absolutely with the wind that you've got, well, maybe you can go back and look at your notes and say, oh, we had a little bit of a cross breeze on this day, and it may have affected my zero just a little bit. And that may give you a little bit more insight to fine-tune that zero later on. So make sure you take good notes. Zero in whatever weather you have that you shoot in the most. Now for me, I zero in whatever weather the weather happens to be when I hit the range on that day. And I re-zero and I fine-tune my zero periodically throughout the year because we're constantly tweaking loads, we're constantly tweaking things on the rifle, so it requires that we fine-tune zero a little bit along the way. Well, that's all for this Mail Call Mondays. Thank you guys again for watching. Thanks for sending in all the great questions. And as far as this pile of parts that will be our MATEN build, we're going to get started on this week, so you should see the first installment of the Mega Arms MATEN build come out before the next Mail Call Mondays. We will be starting on the lower receiver first, and we're going to assemble that. And if you guys remember when we did the previous MATEN build, the 16-inch 308, that was a little drawn out because we didn't have all the components. Sometimes we had to wait for components to come in. That is not the case this time. We have almost everything that we need here. The only thing that I don't have at this point are headspace gauges because I want to be able to show you guys how to check headspace. Thankfully, our barrel and our bolt was headspaced at the factory, so they should be good to go. We shouldn't have any issues at all actually chambering ammunition there. But we'll go through that when we actually get it assembled. If you guys have any questions or comments on anything that we've covered on this show or the MATEN megalithic build, please leave it in the comments section below or send it to us on Facebook or Twitter. If you guys have liked the episode, please make sure you like, share, and subscribe. It really helps us out because it helps our numbers go up, which helps us get manufacturers to send us stuff to review for you. And that in turn helps you guys out because you get to see cool stuff on the show. So again, please like, share, and subscribe. And until next time, get out and shoot.